Welcome back. So the economic freedom fighters turned 11 today. The EFF leader Julius Malema is expected to deliver the main address at a rally in Kimberley in the Northern Cape. It's the party's last gathering ahead of its elective conference set to take place in December this year. But for more on this, we are joined by political commentator Leeto Nthoba, who is a lecturer at the Central University of Technology. Leeto, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. 11 years of the economic freedom fighters. I want to go back to perhaps 12 years ago and look at the political landscape that South Africa certainly had pre-EFF, and if there was an expectation and certainly a need for the party to enter the political fray.
Good morning, Naledi, and good morning to your viewers. And I think, at the time at which the EFF finds itself at inception, there was really a need for a fresh political voice in the country, but also there was also an expectation of at least a successful breakaway party. Because if you can think about it, just like the UDM, PAC, and COPE, EFF is a breakaway of a liberation movement. And so, or a liberation movement party. And so when thinking about it, at inception, there had to be something different. And there was a question also of why these breakaway parties fail so dismally as soon as they leave the nest of the liberation movement. And so I think at inception, we have to give credit to Julius Malema and Floyd Shivambu by the way they started it. Unlike all the other breakaways, the EFF started not as a cult of personality or as a grudge movement of people moving away from a party that they loved just because they were kicked out or because they were disenfranchised, but they started with a basis of a policy position to say the reason why we are leaving is because the ANC is not fulfilling this mandate in particular, and so we are going to take up that mantle on this side of the island. So it wasn't we are leaving the ANC because we hate it or because they don't like us anymore, but because we have a policy grudge against them. We don't hate them. They're still our friends and our brothers, but we feel that they're weak in this point, and that's where we're going to take up the position. And I think that start was really crucial for the success of the EFF in moving in these past 11 years.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point of view, right, around their relationship with the ANC and the policy differences and that separation needing to be noted. I wonder, though, around the voice that the EFF has added to the political landscape. I mean, many have said that obviously they've been able to gather and garner the youth vote, and perhaps you can talk a little bit about that. But there's something to be said about the platform that they've had and how they've used it, the language of the EFF, a lot of the time quite controversial. I mean, at the moment right now, the EFF's leader Ramaphosa has had to apologize for recent comments where he threatened the councillor by saying he wants Afrikaner blood, right? So what do you make of the voice of the EFF in how it's elevated or changed the way that politics sounds in South Africa?
So the EFF sounds like the people that they're trying to appeal to, right? The disenfranchised youth of the townships, of the farm villages who are not listened to, have nobody to lend an ear to them, and who are hopeless in the way in which the system currently operates. And so the sort of things you hear them say, the outbursts that you hear them fighting in parliament, that would be the kind of attitude of the people they're trying to pander to, right? But of course, that also stunted their growth a bit, because it also alienated the people who thought they would be a unifier in trying to get economic freedom for everybody. And so that, I think, also was one of their big stumbling blocks. The voice that they had was so rough around the edges, it didn't sit well with the electorate in general, but it sort of galvanized these people that they were aiming for, some of which were very hard-pressed to vote anyway. And so it always became like a sideshow, right? You'd find an EFF rally full of people, but then you can't then link those people to votes actively for the EFF. And I think that was the chasm that they had to traverse. And I think it's also still difficult for them to do that, but for a different total reason. Because right now, their voice is starting to become tempered as they're growing into themselves and are starting to become like the South African politicians. And I think that is also bringing its own challenges in how they're maturing and who their base actually is. And I think this is a time for rediscovery in the EFF. And it's going to be very tumultuous for them in the next 2 or 3 years, because that identity is now at a crisis point.
Yeah, you know, as they celebrate their 11th anniversary, I've got to think back to when they celebrated their 10th last year, and what a moment, right, for the EFF. A packed stadium, Malema having that moment on the crane, if you will. And again, you make the point around they fill up stadiums, but what happens when people get to the ballot box? And perhaps there are missed opportunities, if you think perhaps for the EFF, where it becomes the opportunities that they could have had to lead, even at local government level. Have they had that platform to essentially practice their politics in government?
So that highlight moment of the 10 years, right, is actually the double-edged sword that I sort of pick up from the EFF. This Malema on a crane, confetti coming down, shouting the words of the EFF. And that's exactly also the problem that they suffer from, is that there are no organic voices outside of Julius Malema and the committee around him, right? There's no contestation of ideas. It sounds like every single idea that the EFF has emanates from that central point of Julius Malema and his cohorts, and then nothing else sort of emanates from that. And when you're talking about local government issues or local issues and not national, the problem then becomes they have a great national map, but they have no local maps because there's no contestation of ideas. So the idea on land redistribution should obviously be different from Johannesburg to Welkom to Cape Town to Northern Cape, right? That difference doesn't exist. They only exist at the level at which Julius Malema expresses his point of view on land and what it needs to be on a national level. But on a local and provincial level, there are no voices organically coming out from within the EFF. And so that is, I think, also why the people that they impressed in the beginning are starting to become apprehensive, because the people thought this was a people's movement, but it looks like a Malema movement, a Shivambu movement, and an executive movement more than it is an organic grassroots movement that would take the voices of the disenfranchised into consideration when making these huge sweeping national policies. And I think that disconnect is going to start to become even bigger, because the problem now becomes what happens after Malema, or is there even an after Malema phase in the EFF? And what does that look like? And I think this is an opportunity, but also a big stumbling block for them. So that's standing in front of them.
Yeah. So then what happens in December when the EFF does head to its elective conference? I mean, you talk about the central figures, Julius Malema and a Floyd Shivambu. Should they look at new leadership? Who would those options even look like? Who would they be, for instance, when they head to that elective conference? Or is the EFF, in fact, weaker without those figures, right? The Julius Malema and the Floyd Shivambu. And perhaps as you answer that, we'll talk about, we certainly have seen a weaker EFF coming out of the 2024 elections, but are we seeing a weaker Julius Malema, is the question.
Of course, because now, let's make a comparison between the ANC Youth League and the EFF, right now. The new ANC Youth League National Executive seems to come out of obscurity at the level of the lay South African, right? But in the political arena, we know voices like Malachi, like the Olga Sietes inside that party have been rising young voices and were at the precipice of being the national executive for the Youth League. On the other side, in the EFF, what we're talking about is actually backbiting and infighting in the national executive themselves. We are saying that Ngozi has aspirations for Secretary General and is moving against Marshal Dlamini with the support of Julius Malema. So you have to have, it seems that inside the EFF, you have to have a kingmaker in order for you to get into that executive, to get into the position that you need to. You can't just come out of obscurity with great ideas or just sheer willpower and make it to the national executive. You need the blessing of the cult leader, which is Julius Malema. And I think that cult nature as well always starts to diminish, right? We all know how brilliant General Bantu Holomisa is. But at the time at which the UDM is supposed to grow, he's still there, and that is what deters people from going into the party. And so now there's the same fate that Julius Malema and the EFF are suffering.
Okay.
At the point at which the EFF is supposed to be maturing, you still have the same leader you had a decade ago.
Okay,
Who is this guy now, and why is he still there?
I need to squeeze in one last question here, Leeto, but I'm running out of time. Apologies for cutting you off. But as he takes the podium today, the leader of the EFF, Julius Malema, what is it that he needs to say to certainly the followers of the economic freedom fighters, particularly as the formation of this GNU has taken place and the EFF not included, part of the progressive caucus, and there's already a clear divide in the political representation in our country. What does he say as he takes that podium today?
I think he should take a page out of Jacob Zuma's or Jacob Zuma's Bible, right, and be the ever-shunned son at this moment to say, yes, this is how they've always treated us. This is what South Africa looks like for me and you, and try to appeal to that base that got him here, that gave him the strength to be the leader that he is, to show that there are those in South Africa who are always on the back burner, and those people must galvanize around the EFF, but also have a more somber tone to show that he's a matured political leader who will be a matured opposition leader, because even though the MK is the major opposition, the real opposition in parliament as far as experience goes is the EFF, and I think he needs to take up that position and run with it.